Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the Old World. Today, let's look at the role of light cavalry in Warhammer The Old World, and has this changed post FAQ and, most importantly, the release of the Matched Play Guide. I'm going to consider this partly through the lens of the Empire, but what I've got to say will also apply equally to other factions. Let's start, however, by talking about the traditional role of light cavalry in the real world. This will provide some context for what we're talking about when we're looking at their role in-game. Really, I think the light cavalry functions can be categorized into two spheres: what is happening in campaign and what is happening as a battlefield role. However, these two are interlinked. As a bit of an aside, I am reminded of some commentary by General Chuck Horner of the United States Air Force. He talked about an idea that amateurs speak of strategy and tactics, professionals talk about logistics. And that is definitely relevant, as we'll see. So let's come back to the main point here. What's these functions in a campaign setting? Well, you've got, I think, here two things. You've got scouting. This is finding out about the enemy, what they're up to, what their forces consist of, stuff like that, and also finding out about terrain, what's coming up on the line of march, where do you want to deploy, what ground do you want to seize and wait for your opponent to force them to engage in a landscape of your choosing. The other function is screening. It's about preventing your opponent's scouting forces from doing exactly what you're trying to do to them. On the battlefield, there's also two key functions. The first one is harassment. It's about preventing your opponent doing quite what they want to, threatening flanks, maybe sporadic missile fire, being a bit of a nuisance. And the second one is pursuing fleeing forces, turning a retreat into a rout. Light cavalry isn't a main combat unit. They're not going to have the power, the might on the charge, etc., to really mix it with a true combat unit, whether it be heavy cavalry or formed infantry, but they can have a bit of an annoyance factor. Obviously, this isn't true of all kinds of light cavalry across history and, of course, Warhammer, but is generally the case. Let's now put this into the context of Warhammer, or at least what it was like before the Match Play Guide. So, what were the roles that light cavalry fulfilled? Well, the first thing they did was they could be a chaff drop in the deployment phase, forcing your opponent to deploy key units before you do, which then allowed you either to place hard counters to them or to play an avoidance game to really stay out the way of that key killer unit that was going to mess up your battle lines. This is very much actually akin to that scouting and screening role. It's about knowing what your opponent's got and where they're going to be so that you can react to it, whilst also protecting your key drop so your opponent can't react as easily to them being deployed. We've also got a role of chaff clearance, so this kind of goes into that harassment. It's preventing your opponent, and actually also scouting screening a little bit as well, to be honest. It's about preventing your opponent's chaff units from acting as effective redirectors, etc., so allowing you to get the best out of your main combat units. Light cavalry pose an effective flank threat, so getting round the side of enemy units. If you've got a good enough unit strength and can get a supporting charge in that just takes away the rank bonus of an enemy unit, that could really swing something in your favour. Losing 2-3 points of combat resolution is never something an opponent's going to want. Then you've got wizard and war machine hunting. I think something we've seen a lot of in Warhammer The Old World is the concept of the lone wizard, whereas in previous editions you'd often see them bunkered down in a unit. That's often not the case here. They're just moving around using their skirmish rule advantages to get 360 line of sight, while staying close enough to units to be kept safe. So they are vulnerable to being picked out by charging light cavalry if they're not used properly. And finally, we've got the idea of chasing fleeing units. So once a unit is starting to flee. And I think this is less common because of the fallback in good order rule. But should it happen, do you really want your big combat unit, like a big block of knights or something, to be chasing fleeing units around the field? Or just finish them off with a small unit of light cavalry? I think the light cavalry option here makes a lot of sense. Post match play guide, what are we looking at here? Well, we've got a new function, which is point scoring. So how can they do it? Well, if you've got a unit of light cavalry of unit strength 10, so 5 bodies, and they are from your core choice, they can take objectives. Now, for the Empire, there's very limited opportunities here. If you're in the army of Nuln, then Outriders become core, so they can do it. However, you are, and this is across all factions, if you're using your light cavalry to take and hold objectives, then they are losing out on their mobility. Unless you're doing it just for turn 1, go up, grab those early points, the infantry then comes and takes over. Thinking of that army of Norm with Outriders being core, I'm slightly minded around the opening scenes, really from the Battle of Gettysburg, where the cavalry get involved, they slow down the Confederate advance, they suck in forces, allow the Union troops to secure the ground they want without being rushed by the Confederate vanguard, leading obviously to the ultimate victory on the field several days later. And thinking about it, the amount of damage Outriders can do, particularly in that Nuln army where they don't have the ponderous rule on their weapons, and you can bring in a magic item that prevents them from suffering the long range penalty. These lads can do quite a lot of damage, particularly to lighter enemy forces. Next up, we've got Hunt the Baggage Train. So if you can get rid of your enemy baggage train, that's 250 points. That's a pretty useful swing. Now, the baggage train is always going to be deployed right at the back of the table, probably the minimum 3 inches away from a table edge. It's almost likely to be protected by something as well. So it's going to be difficult, but for a relatively cheap unit, if you can get them all the way around your opponent's forces and into that baggage train, it's definitely going to get some value. Finally, we've got domination. So at the end of the game, having that mobility to slip into table quarters, it all helps to add up towards getting the most out of your point score as possible. So I think really actually plays into the role of the light cavalry quite nicely and gives them some extra opportunities to get some value. It may need, if you are particularly interested in domination, needing to think about keeping those light cavalry safe from harm so that they can nip around and tame the table quarters at the end of the game. So they may be a bit too weak to do that in otherwise, but it's an option that is available. As an aside, how good is the Empire at fulfilling these light cavalry roles? Well, really, they've got 3 units capable of doing it. I say 3 units because we're looking at Pistoliers, Road Wardens, and Outriders. And I don't really see Outriders as being light cavalry, but they can fulfill that role. Only outside of the Army of Infamy for the armies of Norn, because generally speaking, you're going to want to maximize their firepower. You want to be avoiding the ponderous rule, so you want to be vanguarding and staying reasonably static, blazing away at suitable targets. They're more akin, I think, to the earliest of dragoons, effectively mounted infantry with guns, than they are your hussars. Pistoliers, they're quite interesting post-FAQ, so these are going to be a special or rare slot, depending on what sub-faction you're using. Impetuous is now less awful. It's not a straight-up 50-50 that they're going to charge into something you really don't want them to charge into. It's now a leadership test, and at Leadership 7, that does give them a much better chance of doing what you want them to do. However, Impetuous is still a weakness, and there's still a pretty decent chance that you will lose control of them. Not something you want, even if it is quite fluffy. Armed with pistols, they've got some short-range firepower. It's not bad. Strength 4, AP 1, Armor Bane, 16 points each. They're not particularly expensive, and they are very quick. Overall, however, whilst I think they have better play than they used to. I'm still a little concerned about the Impetuous rule, and I think other options are better if you've got the points to pay for them. This brings us on, I think, to the Road Warden, a force, or rather a unit which appears in the Arcane Journal. These are 0 to 1 per 1,000 points and come in the special category. With ballistic skills 4, they come in at 18 points a model. Crucially, I think these are effectively pistoliers without the Impetuous special rule. You can, for an extra point a model, +2 for the unit champion, give them a brace of pistols, giving them the same sort of firepower as the pistoliers and the ability to move around and fire. Otherwise, they're coming armed with crossbows. You can give these units ambush and scout. Each of those special rules costs 1 point per model, so it does mean they can come on at the end, they can whip round, try to get into a position to threaten those baggage carts a little bit easier, for example. But you are, for a unit of 5, you're looking at 100 points if you've given them pistols and ambush, say, and not giving them the upgrade of a unit champion. So they're starting to get towards the slightly more expensive end there. Finally, we've got the Outrider. These are a special option unless you're from the Force of None, in which case they become core. They can use pistols. They've got them by default, but mostly you're going to be relying on their repeater handguns. 3 shots at ballistic skill 4, 5 for a unit champion, strength 4 with some armor piercing. That is able to absolutely chew like blocks of infantry up, clear out chaff, etc., and offers enough armor penetration to be a bit of a threat because of the volume of shots to small, more elite units relying on armor rather than high toughness. They can be quick. They're not the quickest, but they can be mobile if you're willing to sacrifice some of the effectiveness of their shooting. Overall, I'm a big fan of Outriders. I think they've got quite a bit of play, and they can offer really good nuisance factor and offer a great opportunity as well to whittle down units of enemy infantry. If you're worried about outnumber and stuff like that, they can knock a few models off here and there quite effectively. And when teaming up with things like volley guns, you're walking into an absolute hail of fire if you want to do anything about them. So I think personally they've done me quite proud, and I've seen other people using Outriders really effectively too. For a light cavalry that's not really light cavalry, they offer great versatility. So there we go, a bit of a canter through the role of light cavalry and how I think the options available to the Empire stack up. I hope you found this useful. If you're interested in me doing a deeper dive into the light cavalry options and talking about them individually, do let me know. Otherwise, it'll soon be on to the next video and the next idea. Thank you once again for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And as always, do consider a like and subscribe if you found the video useful. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.